Welcome to Civil War Talk Radio with host Jerry Prokopowicz. Our program covers all aspects of Civil War history, from the battlefields to the home fronts, and features guest experts, plus insight from your host as they discuss the most critical period in American history. Now, here is your host, Jerry Prokopowicz.
This is Jerry Prokopowicz with Civil War Talk Radio. J. William Jones is not a household name, not even in the households of Civil War Talk Radio listeners. But in 1906, a former rebel general called him the greatest living Confederate today. Who was he? A devoted Baptist, a wartime chaplain who had known Jackson Lee and Jefferson Davis personally, and a man whose life's mission became the promotion of the lost cause version of Civil War memory. We'll learn his fascinating story from Christopher C. Moore, author of Apostle of the Lost Cause, J. William Jones, Baptists, and the Development of Confederate Memory. That's tonight on Civil War Talk Radio.
Streaming live, the leader in Internet Talk Radio, VoiceAmerica.com.
Are you ready for a disaster? If you are like many people in the world, that answer may sadly be no. Disasters happen unexpectedly to people just like you every day. Tune into Preparing for the Unexpected with business continuity and disaster planning expert Alex Fullick. The show will not only help you better prepare for a disaster itself, but also to prepare you, your place of employment, and community for the aftermath, emotionally, financially, and with a better level of awareness and a stronger feeling of resiliency. Tune in Thursdays at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 6 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Variety Channel.
The Internet's number one talk station. Number one talk station. VoiceAmerica.com. You are listening to Civil War Talk Radio. If you have a question or comment about our program, please send an email to prokopowiczg@ecu.edu. That's PROKOPOWICZG@ecu.edu. Now, back to Civil War Talk Radio.
Welcome to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopowicz, coming to you tonight from the Civil War Talk Radio World Headquarters in the Brewster Building on the campus of East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina. But as always, not speaking for the university or anyone else. My guest likewise speaks only for himself and no institution. It's the reason I'm here in the Brewster Building tonight is because at home the internet service is not working right. I think it could be our modem. I think it is a Fisher-Price model that is somewhat out of date and needs to be replaced. So I'll be standing in line for hours at our local cable shop tomorrow when I should be doing something productive. But that's not a problem. We'll get that straightened out. Meanwhile, I've got good internet here in the Brewster Building. I've also got a noisy piece of equipment out in the hallway that they just turned off a moment before going on the air, which is great. Apparently it's some kind of testing for the safety of the environment here, as we've had an unusual number of professors suffer some serious ailments in the last 20 years. I'm hoping I won't be one of them. But they had this testing device just roaring out in the hallway until moments ago. Fortunately, it's gone, so we can talk quietly now and enjoy the good things about ECU and college life in general. This past weekend, I saw what might have been the best thing I've seen in college football in many years. And it was not the Pirates here at home, ECU demolishing Tulane, 52-29 or whatever it was. It was a big score. Croakers online still complain about it, still whine about the coach. I can't get over these people who have no lives. Can they not dedicate themselves to Civil War study or something more productive than complaining about the coach? But that was not the best thing that happened this weekend in college football, it was my alma mater, Michigan, playing at Wisconsin. And if you're a fan of Big Ten football, you know that Wisconsin has a tradition between the third and fourth quarter where they play an old song from the 90s called Jump Around, and everybody jumps around. And it's quite a sight to see however many they have, 80,000 people, all mostly wearing the school colors, red and white, all jumping around together. It's very impressive. And it leaves the visiting team, somewhat intimidated and demoralized, all these people simultaneously jumping and laughing and shouting. But this week, when they started the jump around celebration, the visiting team, Michigan, just joined in. They ran off the bench on the field and jumped around, waved towels, waved their hands in the air, danced, spun around, and took all the energy out of that celebration for the home team and co-opted it for themselves. It was psychologically brilliant. You can't complain about the other team taking your celebration. I mean, it's a fun, happy thing. It's not like they were making fun of it or anything. They were just joining in. Let's all jump around, said the announcer. Michigan said, okay, we will too. But at the same time, it reminded me of Mr. Bean, like the bad guy doing something to Mr. Bean, and he's so innocent, he thinks it's fun and goes along with it, and you just can't help but love his innocence and naivete. I felt like Michigan, they weren't being naive, they knew just what they were doing, and they were winning the game, and they ended up winning big. But it was the cleverest tactic to turn the other team's loud group celebration into something you can join in with. Favorite sports moment of the year, certainly. Favorite Civil War moment of the year is coming up this week as we begin This Hallowed Ground, the tour of Civil War sites, put off now because of the pandemic since, 2019. Really looking forward to going out there. I hope you'll be one of the people joining us. If not, sign up for a tour this coming spring. Better news is that the federal government is not going to be shut down this coming week, so the Park Service sites will all be open. Although looking at the itinerary, I see a number of the restaurants we normally make part of the tour are in fact closed because of COVID. So the tour will be different this year. We'll try some other things. I'm sure it will be just as good as ever. Anyway, we will miss one thing. Listeners, you may recall hearing John Hennessy on the show talking about the Second Battle of Bull Run. He's the author of Return to Bull Run, the standard book on that topic. And John has been a Park Service historian for many years at Chatham Manor, the headquarters for the Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville sites. And every year was a real highlight for our tour to stop at Chatham and look across the river at Fredericksburg and have John gather us out on the lawn and just talk. It always seemed it was just off the cuff for 20 minutes, the most interesting observations and comments. He would tie things to current events. He would talk about the meaning of the house, the meaning of the war in front of us. It was just one of my favorite parts of the tour, and I'm glad for him that he's moved on to the retirement phase, but we will certainly miss him this year, and we'll have to we'll do something else that'll be interesting and entertaining, but John Hennessy is a great historian, and we will certainly be sorry not to get to see him. We will, all of us, get to hear other great historians in the weeks ahead. There won't be a live show next Wednesday. We'll hear a repeat, but on October 20th, Ronald C. White will join us. I can't believe I've not had him on the show yet. He's written many books about Abraham Lincoln, and his latest is called Lincoln in Private, What His Most Personal Reflections Tell Us About Our Greatest President. On the 27th of October, we'll finish up the month with David Mowry, returning to the show, talking about Cincinnati and the Civil War, and we'll run a few shows in November. North Carolina featured with Michael K. Brantley and a really interesting personal story called Galvanized, the Odyssey of a Reluctant Carolina Confederate, who is also a relative of his. We'll talk with Brad Asher on the 10th of November about Stephen Burbridge. He was the most hated man in Kentucky. and we'll talk about the very popular General R.E. Lee on November 17th with Charlie Knight and his monumental new publication, From Arlington to Appomattox, Robert E. Lee's Civil War Day by Day. And we'll finish up the fall-winter season here with Carrie Janey returning to the show, old friend of the show, and a book that I've started reading early because it's just irresistible. It's called Ends of War, The Unfinished Fight of Lee's Army After Appomattox. And we'll wrap up with Deborah Willis, professor of English, and her exquisitely illustrated book, The Black Civil War Soldier, A Visual History of Conflict and Citizenship. That's on December 8th. So lots coming up. Join us for that. Go to the website, impedimentsofwar.org, see what's there. Mark Gaffney keeps it up to date. He puts up a button for PayPal. You can donate to the show that way. It's just a gift. I can spend it any way I want, not tax deductible. Don't make that mistake. Many people are in federal prison today because of that mistake, I'm sure. Don't be one of them. And those donations to the show are always very much appreciated. Also appreciated are the authors we have on the show, and tonight's author is Christopher C. Moore, instructor of history and religion at Catawba Valley Community College. It's in Hickory, North Carolina, out west of here some distance. And he has written a book called Apostle of the Lost Cause, J. William Jones, Baptists and the Development of Confederate Memory. Christopher, are you there?
I am here. Glad to be on the show.
Welcome. It's good to have you. This book, I'm trying to remember how it came onto my desk, if your publisher just sent it or if you got in touch, but I recall it sat on my desk for several months. I think is it 2019 publication date in this book?
Yes, that's correct, 2019.
Okay, so I think you or your publisher sent it to me back closer to when it came out, and it sat there for a while. There's a lot of books do show up here. And I had to admit, I didn't know who J. William Jones was. I wasn't sure what Baptists had to do with anything. It does have a very striking cover of the stars and bars in the background, but it's all black and white and mostly black. So it's, I wouldn't say sinister, but it's striking in a not in an inspiring way, but a sort of well, terrifying is too strong a word, but it's, well, you see, it got my attention. And it's one of those books where I regret I didn't tear open the plastic the day I got it and read it then, because J. William Jones is quite a character. Let me start by asking, how did you encounter J. William Jones for the first time?
Well, the first time I encountered J. William Jones was by reading Charles Reagan Wilson's Baptized in Blood. And J. William Jones has a chapter dedicated to him there. Wilson refers to him as the evangelist of the lost cause. And at the time, I was working on a PhD at Baylor Baptist University. I was studying with Doug Weaver, a Baptist scholar. And what jumped out at me was that Jones himself was a Baptist minister. And so he seemed like a good opportunity to kind of combine my two interests, Civil War history and history of American religion. And so I felt very fortunate to I had one Civil War scholar tell me it seemed like it was a bird's nest on the ground that someone had not already written a biography of him. And so fortunately was able to do that.
That is a great phrase. It really well, that did occur to me as I was reading. It's like, wow, this guy should be better known. You make a number of points throughout the book, and one of which I just want to start with is the religious aspect. He's a Baptist minister, and you point out that throughout much of Civil War writing on religion, and there's surprisingly little of that, given how important the topic was at the time. There's a kind of common understanding that within the armies, and certainly within the Confederate Army, that chaplains, ministers, missionaries more or less put denominationalism behind them and kind of came up with a common religious viewpoint. And this is a major point in your book, so we're going to take a break in a couple minutes, so we can just get started on that right now. What you clearly don't agree with that.
No, and that was one thing another thing that attracted me to J. William Jones, having studied 19th century American religion and seeing this context of intense denominational rivalries, this context of anti-Catholicism, and reading accounts of Confederate revivals as being these broad ecumenical movements, and sometimes it's a little kind of fuzzy what ecumenism means in that context, and how those Confederate revivals merged into the lost cause narrative, and how that was also an ecumenical movement. That just struck me as strange, that really would have been this place where those denominational rivalries had been muted or set aside. And so that's one thing that made me want to pursue Jones, to see if his published discussions of the Confederate revivals and these halcyon days of denominational fraternity, if that actually aligned with his private views. And what I discovered was that they did not. And so that was one of the mysteries I wanted to unravel here was denominationalism bleeding into those published works about this supposed ecumenism in the Confederate Army. And so yeah, but again, it was a something that didn't sit right with me initially, and something I wanted to try and unpack with his life and story.
So when we talk about denominations, what were the popular denominations, and how many people adhered to them in this era?
Sure. Yeah, you've normally I concentrate a lot on so-called evangelical denominations, primarily looking at Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, and scholars love to bat around, as scholars do, exactly what evangelicalism means. To Jones, however, I think he pretty much meant Baptists, Methodists, and Presbyterians. And those were the three groups that had the largest numbers of chaplains in the Confederate Army. So those are the three primary groups that I look at when I talk about evangelical religion in the Confederate Army.
Okay, so we'll take a short break and come back with that. And I want to talk about the rivalries among those groups and how Jones did both played into that, but also worked together with others. That is one of the numerous and interesting subplots of this book, Apostle of the Lost Cause, J. William Jones, Baptists and the Development of Confederate Memory. We're talking with author Christopher C. Moore. I'm Jerry Prokopowicz. This is Civil War Talk Radio.
Stimulating talk
gets those synapses in the brain firing really fast.
all the time. The #1 internet talk station where your opinion counts. VoiceAmerica.com.
Psych Up Live with host Dr. Suzanne Phillips offers a psychological perspective on coping with common and current life issues. This show addresses topics as varied as marital stress, insomnia, depression, raising teens, campus violence, and building self-resilience. Listen in as Dr. Phillips and her guest experts share the latest in books, findings, and information that will inform and enhance your life journey. Psych Up Live is heard every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Variety Channel.
Attention veterans, are you ready to be your own boss? It's time to launch your own ideas into reality. Discover your clean writing style. Gear up with Marine Corps trained motivator Christina Silva. Christina is a positive energy promoter with a special gift in connecting with innovators. Get the Military Heroes 411 and glean from experts every week by listening to The Christina Silva Show. We're educating our veterans live on The Christina Silva Show, live at 5 p.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Variety Channel.
Streaming live. The leader in Internet talk radio. VoiceAmerica.com.
You are listening to Civil War Talk Radio. If you have a question or comment about our program, please send an email to prokopovic@ecu.edu. That's PROKOPOWICZ@ecu.edu. Now, back to Civil War Talk Radio.
And welcome back to Civil War Talk Radio. Talking tonight with Christopher C. Moore, author of Apostle of the Lost Cause, J. William Jones, Baptists and the Development of Confederate Memory. We were just beginning to talk about the role of Jones as a chaplain in the Confederate Army, in Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, during the war. And at that time, listeners, most of you know, there were revivals in the Confederate Army. Did these happen throughout the war? When did they take place, Christopher?
There's some debate on exactly when they began, but a general consensus is by late 1862. These revivals have seem to have started and continue in some form until the very end of the war. But around late 1862, maybe fall of 1862 is normally when they're dated as beginning.
You make an interesting point that that scholars have argued whether revivals are encouraged more after the Confederates have won a battle or lost a battle. How did that work?
Sure, yeah, and I think that is an interesting point. I mean, I don't think it's just academic hair splitting to talk about the timing of these revivals, because it taps into a theological narrative that many Confederates or many Americans during the time believed, which was this sense of God's retributive justice, this retribution theology, which it kind of also ties into that Jeremiah tradition. Bad things are happening to us because we've strayed from God. And, that gives you not only the ability to interpret the past or interpret bad things that have happened to you, in this case, lost battles, but it also gives you a way of controlling the future. And so that's one way that religion functions here. And in terms of explaining through a religious lens why things are going bad for the Confederacy or why things are going good for the Confederacy. And so in some ways, and some scholars have certainly made this case, even late into the war, in some ways religion's being used as I don't want to say it's deluding people, but in some cases perhaps it is, as you have folks like J. William Jones marching through the trenches of Petersburg saying, listen, we're just one big victory from this whole thing turning around. And so religion could be used to prolong perhaps what was inevitable at that point. And so anyway, that's why I think that the timing of when these revivals happen, are they occurring after something horrible has happened or after something good has happened from the Confederate perspective? I think that's worth noting.
And these revivals do actually cause a substantial number of conversions. A lot of people join the church or express themselves as being born again as a result of this. You quote a range of numbers on this. Is there any rough idea how many people participated in these revivals?
Well, Jones is going to estimate around 15,000 converts in the Army of Northern Virginia. Of course, much of my book is calling into question how much we can trust Jones, but you have others who wrote on the revivals. Methodist minister named William Bennett, who estimates around 150,000, and even modern day scholars kind of hover around 100,000 converts. And this is during a time when a lot of people were espousing perhaps religion in general. I think George Rabel estimates no more than around a third of Confederates were actually, regular churchgoers before the revivals of 1862. But a lot of these soldiers have a general knowledge of Christianity in this case.
One part of the book I found particularly interesting, maybe because it's different enough from my own experience as a reader, was to read about the differences among not only among the denominations, not only the way Baptist and Methodist ministers might collaborate and cooperate on the one hand, but also the way they might differ, even within the Baptist denomination. There were these theological and doctrinal points of contention that seem fairly esoteric, but obviously they were taken very seriously. Can you talk about what separates one from another?
Within the within the Baptists themselves, and you see this come up a lot in Baptist newspapers. Issues that may have not made it into mainstream newspapers become very big deals for Baptists in like the Religious Herald out of Virginia, or the Biblical Recorder in North Carolina. These Baptist newspapers, and you certainly have some Baptists that are because of their adherence to the separation of church and state. They are a little bit hesitant about state-sponsored chaplains, and so that's part of the motivation to have these different types of ministers in the Army. You've got state-sponsored chaplains, you've got denominational Army missionaries, you've got local congregations that support Army evangelists. So you have that as one debate. But even more important, I think, for Baptists in particular, are the ways that people are converting in the armies. You have this sense that folks are coming in droves, at least if we believe Jones and others, that folks are converting in droves. They're asking to be baptized. And if you're a Baptist chaplain who is loyal to your denominational beliefs, then you want to baptize that person, number one, by full immersion, and number two, as a Baptist. But in during the war, you have people who were converting to Methodism and Presbyterianism, and wanting to be baptized as such. And so this becomes an argument among Baptists whether it's okay when someone comes to you to refer them to a Methodist, to refer them elsewhere, kind of like the way that the Santa Claus does in A Miracle on 34th Street. I don't have what you're looking for, but this store does. And so again, it may to many of us may not seem like it's that huge of a deal, but to these folks, it was a very big deal. And I would argue that it was a big enough deal for J. William Jones that it colored pretty much everything that he did.
The terms of it are I don't know if entertaining is the right word, but alien immersion. The idea, I guess, that's being baptized by someone who's not in your denomination.
Right, exactly. So, for example, if you had a Methodist who converted or who said they wanted to be, baptized, or they wanted to be a Baptist, then very likely in the 19th century, a Baptist would not have allowed for an alien immersion, or an immersion that was not done by the full immersion by a Baptist minister, and so they would have required a rebaptism. And kind of going back to something earlier that you had mentioned about, the one of the prevalent arguments in the scholarship is that folks like Baptists or Methodist Presbyterians were willing to kind of set that aside, not really emphasize those theological differences, or not emphasize those particularities. And that's one thing I think that Jones's story complicates. He absolutely is committed to, for example, baptism by immersion. There are these mythological stories of him cutting holes in the ice so that he can baptize people by immersion, or him being in rushing rivers, or inside of Union pickets. So he seems to have been willing to risk not only his life, but the life of his convert, in order to stick to those particular Baptist doctrines. And I think that's important to bring up.
You talk also about the idea of forming army churches, that if you join a church, theoretically you join a particular congregation, but when you're in the army, there's no congregation there. And you point out that the idea comes up of forming these sort of non-denominational army churches, but if you're in one of those, you don't get the right paperwork. You don't get a certificate saying I'm in a Baptist congregation, and I can now transfer to another one after the war because I got the right paper. Again, this all seems remarkable from a 21st century perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And that paperwork does become really important. I mean, you have folks like Jones that are signing these baptism certificates so that when you go home, if you're fortunate enough to make it back home, make it back to a home church, you can just be accepted into a local Baptist congregation with the credentials that a Baptist chaplain or Baptist minister of some sort has baptized you from the Baptist perspective, the proper way, the way that the Baptists thought you were supposed to be baptized. And that becomes a controversy for a lot of Baptists, these Army churches, because they are afraid that these denominational distinctions will necessarily not be emphasized, and they weren't, and for good reason. That's one of those places where you look at ecumenism and the Confederate revivals, and from one angle you think, okay, these chaplains are being encouraged by people no less than Stonewall Jackson, encouraging them not to preach sectarian sermons. And so, okay, well, that looks like that's ecumenism. But from the other angle, the rationale for not preaching sectarian sermons is because the soldiers are so denominationally diverse. And so from that angle, it's actually respecting the denominational fidelity of the parish by not pushing your particular denomination on these soldiers in a time when chaplains were very scarce. It's not like it was a buffet where you could just go choose, which chaplain of which denomination you wanted. Very often there was such a scarcity of chaplains that you took what you could get. And so that's one reason that you're not hammering on a particular Baptist doctrine in a sermon, became crucial.
Now, after the war, in his book Christ in the Camp, that Jones is perhaps best known for, or one of the books he's best known for, he emphasizes the collaboration and cooperation among the different chaplains. But you point out that when he says among essentially all denominations, he means all evangelical denominations, Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians. He most definitely does not mean Roman Catholics. Tell us about where that fits into the picture.
Sure, and I think that's another one of those places where, if you take a step back and think, okay, well, J. William Jones, evangelical Baptist minister, he's not crazy about Roman Catholics. That's not a groundbreaking observation. Mm-hmm. I think it becomes important whenever you're trying to challenge this narrative of this broad ecumenism, because certainly after the war, Roman Catholics are absolutely involved in the promulgation of the lost cause. Abram Ryan is a great example of that. He's extremely popular as a speaker and as a poet. Roman Catholic chaplains were certainly active in the Confederate Army. Why this is important for Jones, I think, is because he interprets the Confederate revivals through an evangelical Protestant lens. And these revivals for him become, I think, the ultimate expression of God's favor on the Confederate Army, on the Confederate cause, on the morality and the virtue of Confederate soldiers. And in Jones's mind, that is quintessentially evangelical religion. I mean, he thinks that that's what God is blessing here, the cooperation of evangelical denominations. And if you push that out to the post-war period and the lost cause, I think you find a Jones who really doesn't know what to do with an Abram Ryan. He doesn't know how to situate Roman Catholics into the Confederate mythology. Even though we know that they were certainly a part of it, part of spreading that. So again, I think that's where Jones kind of maybe he's I don't know that he's representative of every chaplain, but he certainly was a major enough player in those Confederate revivals and in the dissemination of the lost cause that I think he complicates some of those prevalent treatments of ecumenism.
I recall when Stephen Wood was on the show, pushing him on the title of his book, The Religious World of Civil War Soldiers, which meant the religious world of evangelical Protestant Civil War soldiers. He had very little to say about Catholics and nothing about Jews, Muslims, anyone else. And that I don't know if it was intentional or just a worldview, that's that's religion, and everything else is outside of it. After the war is when, of course, Jones starts to promulgate this the lost cause memory, in which he has to reconcile this cause that clearly has God's favor, yet it doesn't win the war, clearly in his view. And you make a case that he really sees himself, literally, as you say in the title, as an apostle, that he is commissioned by Robert E. Lee himself, just like Paul going forth from Jesus to spread the word. Jones sees it's his mission to spread the word. Is he delusional?
That's a good question. Because I think as someone who is adamantly opposed to the lost cause, I certainly think a lot of his views borderline on the delusional. However, I think he's within the ballpark here of the way that a lot of ministers interpreted the Civil War through that religious lens. And I realize it's calling him an apostle of the lost cause. I mean, that sounds like, I think that's a nice title. I enjoy it, but it actually did become an interpretive lens for me because I started to think that that's really what makes him tick. And I felt very fortunate. I mean, you're going to spend a lot of time with someone you're writing a biography of. And if you can find something that you're convinced, I think this really is what animated this individual. And I stand by that. I think this idea that he somehow had special access to the Confederate Trinity, like Lee, Jackson, and Davis, that he somehow had an insight and a personal commission, that this is what made him tick. And he felt like he needed to give the post-war South a gospel, and he needed to give them saints. He gives them the gospel in the faithful narrative of the American Civil War from his perspective, and he gives them these saints, these incarnations of Christian virtue as he interpreted them. So yeah, that term apostle really did become an interpretive lens for me throughout the book.
We're going to take another short break, and I want to come back to that point of the incarnation of Confederate goodness in Lee, Jackson, and Davis, which Jones certainly writes about. We're talking tonight with Christopher C. Moore. He's the author of Apostle of the Lost Cause, J. William Jones, Baptists and the Development of Confederate Memory. I'm Jerry Prokopowicz. This is Civil War Talk Radio.
Streaming live, the leader in Internet talk radio, VoiceAmerica.com.
We're making it easier to listen to the Voice America Talk Radio Network wherever you go. In addition to listening live, you can check out information about your favorite talk show hosts, discover new talk show personalities, add shows to your list of favorites, and listen to all of our show archives on demand, all from your iOS, Amazon Kindle, or Android device. Download it from the Apple App Store, Amazon, or Google Play, and get ready to tune in. The Voice America mobile app, powered by Aircast.
If you think you've seen online TV before, let us surprise you.
VoiceAmerica.tv is online now.
The leader in live Internet talk radio has done it again. Multiple channels, a state-of-the-art viewing experience, live and on-demand programs streaming 24 hours a day. It's exactly what you want, when you want it.
VoiceAmerica.tv.
From health and wellness to business, sports, and everything in between. Discover our new world. Visit VoiceAmerica.tv now and experience the future of online television.
VoiceAmerica.tv.
Stimulating talk
gets those synapses in the brain firing really fast.
all the time. The #1 Internet talk station where your opinion counts. VoiceAmerica.com.
You are listening to Civil War Talk Radio. If you have a question or comment about our program, please send an email to prokopovic@ecu.edu. That's PROKOPOWICG@ecu.edu. Now, back to Civil War Talk Radio.
And welcome back to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopowicz, Talking with Christopher C. Moore, author of Apostle of the Lost Cause, J. William Jones, Baptists and the Development of Confederate Memory. We've been talking about J. William Jones, a chaplain, a minister who serves the Army of Northern Virginia during the war, and after the war he begins promoting the Lost Cause. And Christopher, you point out he deifies practically Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Jefferson Davis as these embodiments of Confederate virtue. You have some great phrases throughout the book, and at one the question comes up: did he really know Lee that well, or was he, and I'll quote you here, an obsequious, starstruck ex-Confederate who dropped names to enhance his own reputation? I thought that was great, because he does come across that way to some extent. He's obviously very serious about what he's doing, but you can't talk to him. I have the impression you couldn't talk to him for 5 minutes without finding out, hey, I knew Robert E. Lee personally. How well did he know Robert E. Lee?
I think that's a good point. And if you, it depends on who you're talking to. If you would have asked Thomas Connolly, he would have said that Jones was just a petty sycophant, that he didn't really know these guys very well at all. Now he does meet Robert E. Lee during the war, but he really sidles up to Lee after the war, when Lee's at Washington College, which will become Washington and Lee University. And the way I see it is, and I agree, I think that you really couldn't have been around him very long before that comes up. And, you may have a few people rolling their eyes like, well, here he goes again. He's got to talk about the time he saw Robert E. Lee. And the reason I think he would have been that way is because he seems adamant that Lee, Jackson, and Davis, his Confederate past, Confederate revivals, that they are applicable in every possible situation. When he's talking to Baptist groups, he quotes the Bible, and then he quotes Stonewall Jackson, just seamlessly, as if Jackson would be, one of the biblical writers. When he is working for the Home Mission Board, he's printing pictures of Jefferson Davis in a Baptist newspaper. Jefferson Davis had once been a Baptist, but he certainly wasn't, when he was president of the Confederacy. And this is just, again, something Jones just assumes that all white Southerners are going to be just as enamored with these folks as he is, and a lot of people were. I don't want to de-emphasize how important those figures were for the post-war South, but at the same time, I get the impression that he really cultivates a relationship with Davis and Lee after the war, and whatever interaction he does have with them, he magnifies in his mind probably 100-fold. But again, I'm speculating there.
About Davis, my now retired colleague Don Collins here at ECU wrote a book called The Death and Resurrection of Jefferson Davis, in which he argues that, or demonstrates really how Davis's wartime reputation is very mixed in the Confederate South, and he's blamed by a lot of people for the defeat. You pointed the example of Pollard, for example, blaming Davis, but that by the time Davis dies, he has joined Lee and Jackson in the Confederate Trinity. He's become this hero. Was that partly Jones's doing, or did Jones encounter opposition when he said Davis is a saint on earth, and people say, no, he was a terrible president?
Well, I want to say that by the time that Jones was writing most of his stuff about Jefferson Davis, I think Davis's reputation had already undergone that rehabilitation. I did see pushback whenever in Baptist newspapers, whenever Jones would talk about his close friendship with Jefferson Davis, he would actually get pushback from other Baptists, thinking that he's trying to dredge up these animosities with the North, when you have some people that wanted to kind of move on. And here you go. Here's this ex-Confederate chaplain saying, hey, remember Jefferson Davis. Remember how he took it on the chin for everybody. Remember how he's the martyr of the South. And he's, again, inserting this into a Baptist newspaper. And so he did get a little bit of pushback from that, but at the same time, he's going to get people that are supporting his viewpoint, and some people that trust him without question, because he says he's had this close association with Davis and others.
As we're talking about J. William Jones tonight, we may be giving the impression that he's a harmless crank or extremist. But in fact, he's very popular and gets a lot of attention. But also his version of the Lost Cause, in line with that of Early and others at that time, is not just that Longstreet cost the Battle of Gettysburg, but there's also a strong emphasis on white supremacy. And while slavery, in their view, was not the cause of the war, slavery wasn't such a bad thing. I think that is pretty deeply baked into what Jones says, is it not?
Absolutely, and to be frank, I mean, that was one of the most frustrating parts of writing this book, was trying to pin Jones down on race, and not as much pin him down. I pretty much knew where he was, but he looks like he is going out of his way not to talk about race, not to talk about slavery. He's printing, other people in the Southern Historical Society papers. He's printing some of the things they're saying about slavery or race, but he doesn't want to do it. And even when he is publishing letters of Lee, he's very careful to kind of surgically remove sections, or at least ignore sections of Lee's letters that refer to the slaves at Arlington. Jones doesn't want that part. He uses euphemisms like family matters or things like this. And as I was butting my head up against the wall, wondering, why can't I really nail him down here? It kind of occurred to me that was very much his MO, was this idea that you could narrate the American Civil War with slavery and race being tangential to the conversation. And I think that's why he still speaks. Some things like denominational ecumenism, some of that is, that's kind of academic footnotes that everyone may not be interested in that. But I do think he has relevance for modern day discourse, because you have many people today who, they wouldn't consider themselves, neo-Confederates or anything like that, who still seem to think you can narrate the Civil War without race and slavery being central to it, that they can be brought in, but it's just kind of part of this mixture of a lot of other things that's happening, and it doesn't really have a central place. And so I think that for Jones, I mean, in one sense, that's an argument from silence. But I think in his particular case, based on his work, that's an argument that's a silence that speaks volumes. At the same time, that he felt that wasn't really something he needed to address.
He does mention it somewhat in his School History of the U.S., a school book for children. But you mentioned briefly, and it would be remiss not to talk about it, the Southern Historical Society papers, a major historical project to collect and publish primary source documents right after the war, ostensibly just to have a collection for future historians to work from. Jones was president of the Southern Historical Society, for some time, and clearly he did more than just neutrally collect documents.
Exactly, but it was certainly he certainly wanted to give the impression that what he was doing was he was collecting documents, sorting out, and being not indiscriminate, but claiming that he's going to be presenting both sides of the story and then letting future readers kind of sort that out. What he neglects to say is that he's presenting both sides of Confederates. He's having rival Confederates that are going after each other about who did this, who did that. And he really does try to give this impression that he's collecting sources, which of course he is not. He is the final redactor of these sources, and I would argue as influential as the writers themselves. A good case in point is the character assassination of James Longstreet, which is a campaign that lasts years and years and years. And he's printing interviews from Longstreet. He's printing rejoinders from Jubal Early, and then in private correspondence to Jubal Early, he's saying, "I'm ready for you to slice up." Those are his words. "I'm ready for you to slice up what is left of James Longstreet." So clearly, that redaction he's got an agenda there, and everyone, of course, has an agenda, but he's really he's not showing his cards there. But you don't have to look too hard to see what angle he's at there.
So, I was trying to summarize for myself how to think about Jones, and it seems to me he succeeds in suffusing the lost cause with a religious glow, but not a specifically Baptist one. But he stays, as you show, to the end of his career, very strictly Baptist.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one reason that I felt that this kind of interpretive lens of apostleship, it kind of helped me. I told you I was trying to kind of unravel how you have this fierce denominationalist on one hand who is talking about ecumenism in the Confederate revivals, and again, I think that's probably needs to be more nuanced than it often is, exactly what that entailed. But I think what Jones does here is, instead of downplaying his own denominational identity, he ends up trying to downplay the denominational identity of folks like Lee, Jackson, and Davis. As Zachary Dresser writes, that what Jones is trying to do is construct this common mode of Southern piety. And so I think that was one way that he held on to those denominational loyalties, but at the same time felt this apostolic commission, this drive to somehow paint Lee, Jackson, and Davis as above denominational rivalries, above petty squabbles, and really cast them as superhuman martyr-like figures.
Well, you make the argument, indeed, Christ-like even, which I thought one of the interesting connections you make is that, that Christ dies for mankind's sins in that story. So while he's defeated temporarily on the cross, ultimately victory will follow. And for Jones, the Confederacy is defeated, but he believes very clearly in its ultimate vindication.
Absolutely, and that wasn't unique to Jones in the sense of white Southerners looking at the scriptures and saying, okay, we can locate ourselves in these scriptures. For example, you had many white Southerners who looked at the Hebrew scriptures, looked at God's chosen people as being repeatedly defeated, whether it was by the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Romans. And so they could locate themselves in that narrative and say that even though we were defeated, we are still central in the divine drama. We're still central in God's plan. And so Jones does that with these Christ-like, martyr-like interpretations of the lives of Lee, Jackson, and Davis, where, they are going to suffer on behalf of all white Southerners, and ultimately they're going to be vindicated. So he locates those figures, and by extension, all white Southerners, in this kind of New Testament eschatological promise. And so very much religion, it can be used it's very multifaceted here. You can use it in any number of ways, and that's the way that he's using it.
So the lost cause, that belief then allows white Southerners to come to terms with their defeat. And as you point out, this is a tangent we can't get onto as we're just about out of time, but he allows the white South to reintegrate into the United States, no longer wishing to fight it, but still confident that it's the better part of it, the part with the superior closeness to God, as well as the better generals and the better soldiers and better culture and better everything, really. Everything but numbers is all they lack. I wish we could talk more about this book. It was really interesting. Listeners, if you have the slightest interest in religion and the Civil War, you'll want to read Apostle of the Lost Cause, J. William Jones, Baptists and the Development of Confederate Memory, written by our guest tonight, Christopher C. Moore. Christopher, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate you inviting me on the show.
And listeners, as always, thank you for listening to Civil War Talk Radio.
Thank you for embarking on a part of American history this week. Civil War Talk Radio with Jerry Prokopowicz can be heard live every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Variety Channel. Have a good week.